All right, welcome everyone to this week's coaching session. We are today going to be talking about something that's been popping up a lot on Angela's radar on her side of the office. Seems like it ebbs and flows. We get influxes of different types of cases and patients, and but you were sharing a lot of conversation lately about symptoms of perimenopause, menopause, both on, looking at the nutrition side of things, but also, as we look at red light weight loss and kind of that whole dynamic and how it all fits together, and especially seems like timing of life, right? Women especially begin to have a little bit more time as their kids get older to start looking at and investing in themselves. And it's about that time when maybe perimenopause symptoms may begin to start, or, they're looking at that or concerned about that or feeling that, or wondering if what they're feeling is that, right? So I'm not sure what you all have been hearing or what has been prompting all of this, but walk us through what that looks like for.
So I hear a lot about it, and perimenopause, menopause, moving through that whole transition of life. You'd be surprised to know that one of the first things that I learned about it is that only 28% of women are actually comfortable speaking about what they're experiencing and sharing that with their partners, and only about 41% of women are comfortable even sharing it with a practitioner or a doctor. And I found that to be really fascinating, because it's a pretty big part of our lives as women to move through it as though we are unaffected by it. Or on the other side of things is, I hear a lot of women in here who come, by the time they get to me, they've exhausted all their other options, right?
Yeah, those numbers are actually pretty surprising to me too, because it's not a surprise. Like, it's not something that affects just some women, right? Like, it's
all women. And also there was a statistic to how comfortable they felt about sharing what they were going through in their workspace. So I definitely, after hearing that, was so ready to open up a conversation, because these are conversations we really need to start feeling comfortable about having, right? Early menopause symptoms can start as early as 35. A woman can hit the heating up phase of actually being in perimenopause at 45. That can go all the way to 55, and sometimes for some women into their later 50s, actually. So that's a really wide range to start really having expressions of, different manifestations of what that feels like.
That's interesting. My first thought and question, and when you look at adolescence, it seems like so many more younger females are hitting puberty sooner. And now you get into later adulthood, and it seems like perimenopause and menopause symptoms are coming way sooner.
So early onset, also research statistics show that early onset of menopause has definitely, that percentage keeps going up as well.
Yeah. Did in what you've been looking at, is there any correlation to that at all?
There's correlations, and some of them are, again, it's kind of that, I think that's we'll be opening up a can of worms, with some of those correlations for sure.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Correlation isn't the same as causation.
That's right. That's right.
There's many different factors to all of this.
That's right.
Okay.
But here we are,
Yes.
and we're experiencing symptoms. So I thought it would be great to talk about, what are we experiencing? What does that look like? Outside of, outside of an obvious hot flash or night sweats, what can be taking place in our bodies as estrogen starts to decline, and adrenaline and cortisol as a result of that decline actually begin to rise. You will hear women, and I hear it all the time in here, they will tell me, I feel like I'm crazy and my doctor just wants to put me on an antidepressant. He does say, definitely, let's do a test. Let's figure out, where my levels are at and make that determination. But outside of that, there isn't any really good recommendations outside of hormone replacement therapy, which there is a time and place for that, for sure, and everything. But little subtle symptoms, actually, such as, your heart rate starting to elevate, actually having palpitations. It makes sense because your body is doing so much adrenaline dumping into the system at that point that it actually does elevate, and you have a very real visceral reaction. So, people will say, oh, anxiety is a part of going through menopause, but nobody actually tells you that there is a biochemical set of reactions that cause that to happen. Also, and there is a correlation because that dip in estrogen and lower estrogen levels, actually, depending on where you're at, actually, do lend themselves to some cardiovascular distress. So actually being able to know these things and actually start taking care of your heart at this time in your life too, are things to start thinking about from a nutritional, standpoint. But
so if menopause is new to someone and they're kind of entering this stage of life, stress typically is always there,
right?
And I guess, how would someone know, because we're really good at justifying things, how would they know, man, I'm just too stressed out, or I'm beginning to go through menopause, or I'm too stressed out and I'm beginning to go.
That's usually it.
Sure.
Right. I was already stressed out, and now compounded stress on top of compounded stress. And now my menses are getting really scanty. Like I can't figure out any rhyme or rhythm to them. That starts to take place. The heating up at night definitely starts to take place. That heart racing, maybe the blood pressure is a little bit out of whack. And then I realized more research shows that you can have somatic, really somatic type of, you just feel like your equilibrium is really off, actually. People can really feel a lot of that type of feeling, which is, we feel like, what's going on, but that's another real reaction. So weight gain, another real response to that adrenaline coming up and that cortisol coming up, because adrenaline and cortisol cannot be initiated in your system without their partner in crime, and their partner in crime is insulin. So we call this the great adrenaline cortisol insulin loop. So now we've got this whole loop that's going on top of everything else as a result of this cascade. And at that,
but hormonally, you're saying a lot of that, like, we normally have a normal amount of that going on,
right?
And then
now take
now
a
you're
big
saying that
dive in estrogen.
Yeah, okay, so estrogen
estrogen takes a dive, and that is going to throw progesterone and testosterone and DHEA. It's going to throw all that out of whack. So all of those hormones are going to become unbalanced, and the body is just trying to create homeostasis and that. So there is actually a lot going on for females. Man, it is just wild to me. As much as was going on when you were creating life in your body and you were pregnant, and all those hormones were building, and then delivering and birthing a child, is the same amount of, the same amount of crazy, it shouldn't be crazy, beauty, the same amount of beauty that goes on as you're also making this next transition of life also.
It just happens over a much longer,
longer period of time, and there's
Yeah.
and people are like, where's the reward at the end of this? A little harder to be invested in the work of it all, but there's a way to do this gracefully, I promise. I can promise you that. So that vertigo, that very visceral reaction. So if you feel like you've got a lot of these things and they're all going on at once, it's definitely time to check some of those levels, right? And usually, like you said, compounded. It's more than one thing. We already have this loop going on as it is, and now you just add that extra layer, and there is the tipping point right there.
Mm. So testing that, we can do blood tests,
yes,
which give us kind of that initial snapshot of a hormone panel and thyroid, and kind of the full gamut of what's going on. Even looking at cholesterol and things like that. We can also do saliva hormone testing, which I think, for the menopause and perimenopause panels, is not like the 30-day looking at the cycles, but it is, through a day and kind of what those levels have done, especially with insulin and cortisol, because estrogen may not increase drastically through the day,
right?
But cortisol will,
yes.
And you can start to connect those two things. If baseline estrogen is low or lower than it should be, and we're seeing differences in cortisol, then we have a better idea of I guess, how to really support someone as they're going through this, because just giving them testosterone is not necessarily going to support the whole picture. It's just going to help a lot with hot flashes and maybe a lot of the sexual health side of symptoms of.
And that was the other conversation to start having, was the dryness, the lack of libido, and all those other things that actually start to take place that kind of make you feel like you're not normal,
And that's probably because it's hard to hide hot flashes.
Right? It's hard to hide hot flashes.
But that's probably where it's harder to have those conversations with a partner or your doctor or work or.
I have women come in and tell me, this is such an important part of my life. Like, my relationship and my intimacy with my partner is such an important part of my life. So this is it's really affecting them. So to sit down and really have a conversation like that, first of all, it's heartbreaking and heart-wrenching. But again, and they'll tell me, it's like, no one's talking about this. Nobody's having, open conversations about this. And I'm always like, I'm ready to have that conversation, because we, like you said, just putting this in place or testosterone in place, that's not gonna, necessarily, like you said, it's not necessarily going to the bottom of the bottom of the bottom. I remember my professor saying, like, always look upstream. Like, we, go to the bottom and look upstream. Like, what is going on at the bottom of the bottom, and how can we support that whole cascade? How do we support the whole cascade? Yes, may we need things to actually support testosterone and modulators, to support progesterone, and there's other amazing herbs.
And we've worked with women who are on testosterone.
Yes.
And they it's changing their lives.
It's night and day, night and day. They've tried all of the phytotherapy. They've tried all of those things, and it just wasn't getting it. And then I have women on the other end of it who the phytotherapy is just enough to actually relieve the hot flashes and the night sweats and the dryness and the libido and all of those things. And again, supplementation for honestly, like that over upregulation of adrenaline dumping too.
So first step, if you're kind of beginning this, or you're just tired of going through the process, or you don't know what to do, because there's really no stopping it,
Right.
right? It's understanding where you're at in it.
Right. Again, like having a baby, there's no stopping that.
Yeah. You're not just a little pregnant.
And when it's go time, it's just go time.
Right.
There's no turning back, I'm sorry to say.
I'm not kind of pregnant. I'm not kind of in menopause. Getting a snapshot of where you're at. Blood tests or salivas, which is what we would prefer to get a kind of a more accurate picture. But so then, once we know where someone is at, what's available to begin to, start to look at some of the symptoms and just the overall process.
There is so many wonderful.
Well, before I get to that, let me ask you this. In your opinion, are a lot of what women and what we're recommending doing as we're looking at the blood work, is it really just managing symptoms, or is it changing the actual process of going through?
I would say supporting the process of going through. I wouldn't say it's not necessarily going to change that we're going through the process. We're going through the process, but like, how do we support ourselves to go through that process? Because there are very thoughtful approaches to that, right? So first of all, like, if we're cortisol, adrenaline, insulin looping, it makes, sense that we would support, right, the HPA axis. We would support the adrenals. We would support that, hyper, production, right then and there, right? So nourish the adrenals. They're working on that. We would support our blood sugar. That makes so much sense, right? Because if cortisol cannot be initiated without insulin, guess what? Insulin's not initiated without cortisol. So actually starting to really balance that, blood sugar using herbs, but also definitely, the way that we are eating, the way that we're exercising. Holy cow. At that point, compounded stress changes everything going through that. It's going to change the type of exercise we're doing, right? And what we eat, first thing after breaking our fast, like those things become really important. And then there's amazing herbs that can really help with all of that and everything that's inside of that, which is, it's incredible too, right? To balance, progesterone, to balance testosterone. There's herbs that can come alongside of that don't act as the hormone, but actually are there to nourish what's already existing, which is, it's incredible.
So what's your approach to that?
As far as like,
looking at, like, making those recommendations on where to begin, because there's, like you said, there's probably, let's say, 20 different herbs
there are
that you could start to work with someone.
It's true, and everybody responds differently, which is why I muscle test. I muscle test because not everybody responds to the same thing, and you'll go out and get one variation, right? And also it's knowing what you know, right? When somebody, like progesterone, right? One of the most fabulous herbs out there is wild yam. For supporting that. But there's so much out there that you have to really be careful, because Japanese yam is not wild yam, and other derivatives are not that. And what it's being coupled with is going to change everything, right? Somebody couples it with Shavatari, which is great for dryness and honest to goodness, like, mucosal rehydration. And something that's not coupled with that is going to feel and act really differently on someone. So it just depends on what the complexes are made up of that really are huge game changers in there. But my approach is, number one, always support the HPA axis, always support the adrenals, always support blood sugar regulation, and then start talking about, okay, Tribulus is amazing for supporting testosterone. Wild Yam's amazing for this. Shavatari is great for this. It's finding the right complexes, and then figuring out, what do I need to do with my liver right now? This is a real big thought, because I have a lot of women who go through this phase of life, and now all of a sudden they have mast cell syndrome. And the reason they had mast cell syndrome is because there's so much homotoxicity coming through their liver, because your liver is responsible for metabolizing all these hormones that are that are really trying to regulate.
So if a woman is like, they saw some Instagram, TikTok, post on this amazing new herb, how do they gauge that? Is it really just trial and error? Is it come in and get tested? Is it, and often a question, because we're dealing with hormones, is how long do I give it before I really think, before I start to make a judgment on whether this is going to be effective or not? Because we know blood turns over every 90 days.
That's right.
But hormonally, how often would we expect, let's say we give somebody our Mediherb Wild Yam or Tribulus. I mean, I know those aren't going to take 90 days to begin to see improvements and changes on. So, if somebody's trying to gauge how long do I give this before I need to make some new adjustments and changes, what's your...
So typically I, at 30 days. 30 days, because 30 days is what it takes to get some of that in your system to start to actually make a big enough difference.
And I know some products will load.
We'll titrate up, and that's what.
Then,
And
it's both ways, right? So sometimes you load in the beginning.
You do.
And then you go to a maintenance dose.
Yes.
And other ones you start lower and
right.
you increase.
That's right.
As time goes on.
That's right.
Is that herbs in hormones in general do one or the other, or it really just depends on symptoms? And
most of those herbs and hormones have a loading. There's a loading phase, and some of them stay pretty consistent. Again, all of your adrenal, making sure all of that, that's always going to remain consistent throughout. Some of these other ones are gonna
So
load and titrate up and down, and then tweak. You've got to be really patient in that, because you could be on a supplement protocol and then realize just a little bit of natural iodine coming from bladder whack was all you needed to really make a huge impact on those night sweats and hot flashes. It's really interesting. And somebody else, the little bit of xyphus that's in valerian root for one person makes all the difference in their heating up through the night. So it just also depends on who you are and your body's own biochemistry. But you do need to be, definitely open-minded to, adjusting.
It's going to take time
along the way.
Just like you're going through a process, it's going to probably evolve and change as your own experience does.
That's right.
Through that process.
That's right. And I don't want to forget to even talk about our Emcella chair as I am thinking through all of this, because it has been a real game changer for a lot of women who have been going through that and experiencing, lack of libido and some of that dryness that we're talking about, because it has really just help them reignite a lot of that. Again, that's in conjunction with putting a lot of these things back in balance, but that's definitely...
And we've talked about the converse of that, which is also a lot of women that are coming in
Oh.
with incontinence issues, as part of our intake,
Yes.
we're having those conversations about dryness and pain during intercourse.
Yes.
And so much of those symptoms and incontinence is also
Yes.
related to. So it's not just, well, the
No.
chair is not a magic fix either.
No. How about this? The incontinence, I'm so glad that you brought that up because, we talk about how do some of these things manifest, and every time we as women go through any type of hormonal changes, it directly affects our pelvic floor. So, and that was surprising. I remember the first time I heard that and thought to myself, oh my gosh, like it makes all the sense in the world, people kind of hitting perimenopause and then menopause and realizing, you think that it's just one without the other, but actually both of those factors together, again, there is a weakening of the pelvic floor during this time also.
Mm-hmm. And it's not just, it happens as one ages,
yes.
but it's not a normal part of aging.
Right.
It can be addressed because it's not just, well, I'm getting older, so I have to just deal with it.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. There was one other, weight. So we talk about cortisol and body changes happen a lot during that period of time too, which just compounds people's frustration with like, I don't feel like myself. I'm not. My relationship's not is different.
Yeah.
And now my body's changing on top of that.
And I'm feeling I'm feeling insecure about that, which is further impacting. Not only am I feeling the physical side of that, now there's a very psychological side of that as well,
and emotional and relational.
Yeah, and it does, like every time I sit with someone, like yeah.
So how does that change? Because our Keratin and red light program, we have a very broad range of people.
Sure.
At different stages of life going through that.
Yes.
How does that program change?
Yes.
And maybe program's not the right word.
Yeah. No. I talk about recognizing that, and that until you actually unhook the loop, because what I hear, and it's true, it's 100% true, and I tell these women, I'm like, this is not on you, like this is biochemical chaos at its best, this isn't on you, because they'll come in and they'll say, oh, my doctor told me, just to, eat less and exercise more, and I haven't changed anything. I told them I haven't changed anything, and truly they're not eating any different, they're not making any changes, they're exercising the same, nothing's different, and all of a sudden the weight is coming on, and that's the loop. That's how you're hooked into that loop. So with when we are entering this phase of our lives, the first thing we need to do is address the loop first. So always address the loop, because your body will not let you liberate toxicity without addressing that loop first. And that loop is the adrenaline, cortisol, insulin loop, or sometimes I'll refer to it as, HPA access, a lack of communication anymore, like things are going offline and, everything's kind of, and you're feeling that. So being able to address that so the body can do what it knows to do in liberating toxicity from the system is the first thing that we address.
Okay. So there's still a way to lose weight through menopause.
Oh, absolutely, which is so refreshing and exciting to hear. And we have women doing it here every day. Mm-hmm. And excited about it.
Yeah, okay. So we want to continue this conversation because there's a lot of things that we just talked about here.
There is, and I want to hear more from, those of you who, are ready to open up more of those conversations and, just any thoughts and, yeah.
Yeah, so if you have specific questions about menopause or perimenopause or kind of any of the symptoms that you're experiencing or having, or just the process in general, make sure to leave a comment below. Let's keep this conversation going. And if you want to talk about testing or the Emsella chair and how we can support you through this process, or we're happy to do that. We want to be here to support you in that. So we'll see you next week. Have an amazing week and live a life fully lived.